I'm delighted to welcome our panel here, which represents a broad swathe of the economy, from retail to technology, real estate, and renewable energy, and all from different parts of the world. Before we get going, I'll introduce them very briefly. To my left is Kira Hurst, the head of worldwide sustainability at Amazon. Welcome. To her left is Christoph Schell, the Chief Commercial Officer at HP. To his left is Christian Ulbricht, the President and CEO of JLL. And at the far end, we have Ignacio Galan, the CEO and Chairman of Iberdrola, not a stranger to you, one of the world's most successful green energy companies. Kara, let me start with you. So we're here to talk about solutions. Amazon is a very interesting test case. Like many logistics and delivery companies, you face huge challenges when it comes to cutting your carbon footprint, when it comes to being as efficient as possible, when it comes to packaging and cardboard. And of course, you are one of the biggest companies in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about what Amazon is doing so that it's part of the solution rather than part of the problem?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. We're super excited to be part of the launch of Bloomberg Green. We have been working on sustainability for a long time at Amazon, and it is absolutely a solutions-focused set of initiatives that we're excited about. We're looking at how do we use our scale, our size, the reach that we have in the different businesses that we're in, and whether that's retail, logistics, cloud computing, devices, products, about how we can transform our own business and then share those stories and think about partnering with other companies. So we started on this work many years ago, started by transforming our packaging and looking at packaging initiatives, waste out of packaging, new packaging materials. And it's evolved into a look at our transportation and logistics. And we took a very deep dive on that over the past few years and created what we call internally a carbon system of record that allows us to really understand operational changes, how this embeds within our company globally. And when we think about that, we not only wanted to make an ambitious goal for ourselves, which we've taken in our march towards achieving net zero carbon by 2040. But we also co-created the Climate Pledge with our partners at Global Optimism, Christiana, who's here today, and Tom Karnak, and are inviting others to join us, because we think part of that is actually how do you share those solutions? How do you co-invest on new technologies? How do we talk to each other about what we're seeing in the corporate sector, but of course across that into government, nonprofit, multilateral, all of us who need to be a part of this. So we're partnering also with the Nature Conservancy. We established something called the Right Now Climate Fund. We put $100 million into reforestation, afforestation, wetlands, peatlands, looking at all of those solutions around the world. So we're trying to tackle this from multiple different points, which is first, of course, to share where we are, to measure that, share that progress, then to think about how we're decarbonizing our own business and making real operational changes and empowering our business leaders to make those changes, and then thinking about natural climate solutions and where we can be a part of those and how we can create a community around those solutions.
Christian, let me turn to you. So as President and CEO of JLL, you oversee the world's second largest commercial real estate services company. And when you look at the data, it's quite remarkable. Real estate, I believe, accounts for a third of all carbon emissions around the world, 40% of the world's energy consumption. What have you found to be the most successful approach to reducing the carbon gas emissions from your buildings?
Well, I think these numbers are pretty stunning, and so it starts with measuring it. You have to collect the data, and then you have to set out a really ambitious target, what you like to achieve. And then there are a couple of easy wins. One was mentioned. I mean, there are lots of countries where you can move to renewable energies. That helps a lot. But you have to find ways to just reduce the consumption of energy, and that needs a kind of combined effort from every organization, the right tone from the top. And you can create quite a nice momentum within organizations, because what we have learned that the staff engagement is very high on that topic. And if you create that right momentum, you will get to very quick success rates in reducing your carbon footprint.
And in which parts of the world do you see the sort of, in which parts of the world do you get the most questions from clients about this? Where is concern at its greatest?
Well, it's kind of patchy. The UK and the Netherlands and the Nordic states are very much in front on that topic, but also Australia. You have it in the US and parts of the US. We get a lot of questions from the West Coast in the US. But, I think it has gained a lot of momentum. We started on that topic back in 2012 when we created our own first sustainability board, and we moved into a global campaign which we called Building a Better Tomorrow back in 2015. And in those years, it was still a bit of a lonely attempt. But over the last 2 to 3 years, the momentum around the world is massive.
Christoph, let me turn to you. As we were preparing for this panel, we talked a little bit about 3D printing. And, part of what Green is trying to achieve is to take a closer look at some of the technologies that will help us head off the climate crisis. 3D printing is not necessarily one of those technologies that people associate with the fight against climate change. But can you tell us a little bit about how it actually can play a big role?
I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me. So I think 1/3 of all global carbon emission can be attributed to the manufacturing industry. So between real estate and manufacturing, you have 2/3. At HP, we're a technology company, and we're really good in a science called microfluidics. It's what we use in our inkjet printers. A couple of years ago, we thought about what else can we use it for? And we decided to enter 3D printing. And to us, it's a analog to digital disruption. So the way I want you to think about this is what mankind does today is we manufacture and distribute. And the carbon footprint that we create by doing that is immense. What 3D printing and digital manufacturing will do is we will distribute and manufacture. So we are decentralizing manufacturing. That's a really big deal from a supply chain, from a value chain point of view. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is when you design a part, an application for 3D printing, complexity is free. So what that means is that applications and parts, they get reduced in mass. So they get lighter, okay? And so the impact that you have on material consumption, but also on weight for any part in an application has a significant impact. And then the last piece is all the material that you don't activate in our technology, you can collect it and reuse it, okay? So it's a really closed loop. And I think all of these three aspects together make 3D printing an essential part of digital manufacturing, and digital manufacturing an essential part of reducing carbon emissions in manufacturing.
Thank you. Ignacio, I'd like to bring you in here. We'll talk a little later about renewables technology and the outlook for renewables investment. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit about politics. Clearly, politics will need to be part of the solution as well if we're going to bend the emissions curve towards a level that will somehow get us, will keep us below 2 degrees. Governments need to lean in very heavily on policy. We're sitting here in Europe. We've had Ursula von der Leyen was on Bloomberg TV the other day talking about her Green Deal. How optimistic are you about the Green Deal in Europe, and what are the obstacles? What do you see as the main obstacles for her in pushing that through, and how much of an impact can it have?
So for those which we've been already in this, let's say, target of diminishing emissions, we started 2001 trying to change the model of our traditional utility into a renewable utility. So what we heard already from that time is from most politicians, they were not concerned. Even in many cases, those politicians and regulators just avoid ourselves to generate with green or to sell green energy. So I think contrast like we have with Amazon in this moment, we are not able to sell that one because they said that we are already making a fraud because the electricity which is coming through the cables are not distinguishing which kind is it. So this is a tremendous change today. Today in Europe and most countries, I think politicians are aware that the problem exists. So in the case of Europe, the situation even is better on that one. The European Commission has already understood that that is not a problem, that is very good opportunity for Europe to lead all this climatic change, because that means jobs, that means technology, that means even international influence. And I think that's why they're putting on top of the agenda this Green Deal together with digitalization, together with immigration. And what that Green Deal means first, to try to move from nice words to action. So I think we move from a situation in which many people don't recognize that the problem exists to a situation now almost everybody recognizes the problem exists. And there are very many which is recognizing, but they are doing nothing. The European Commission, the former government of the European Commission and the present government of the European Commission has already done a lot. They have already established certain rules. The first one is to establish a price for the carbon. The market of the ETS, how the carbon price can already be managed in the market, has already introduced something which is a market strategic reserve, trying to avoid the problems that we faced in the past where the allowances of carbon were too high and the price was too depressed. Now they are trying to get the price at a certain level. The third one, they are already asking to each of the member states to make a national plan of energy and climate, which they are already obliged to present in Brussels to be approved by Brussels, by the European Commission, and to be supervised and to be penalized if that is not achieved. And the fourth one is that they're already putting the necessary means for that one. Even they are already trying to use already the European Bank of Investment as the green bank, a bank for funding and financing all these things. They are already just trying to introduce rules in which another sectors which are not included in this ETS system will be as well included, transport and other ones, which up to now they are not. And they are already just as well trying to rise, to put in the system something like a trillion euros for already helping that happen. So I think the European Commission has already understood that the climatic change is a real opportunity for Europe, and they would like to use that one. I think that is going to create jobs. That's going to create more technology. There are sectors in which Europe is leading, which is the case of wind, for instance. There are sectors which Europe has not already done much, for instance, in batteries, storage, but now they are going to work in this direction. So they are already just trying to do their best in areas like grid digitalization and smart grids. We are pioneers, Europe, in this one. We would like to stand that one. So I think Europe now is already moving in the right direction and trying to move in very, very speedy manner. Mm-hmm. And for those that we've been already for years just trying to do so is absolutely great, because now we have not to fight any longer with regulators. Regulators are already just recognizing our efforts. They are not only not penalizing, but as well helping that when we diminish our emission, like we are already, which is less than 1/4 of European peers, but we are achieving the targets now, which most of our European peers are for 2030. So I think we are welcome in the fact we are already being used in forums for explaining what we have already done, which I think that's great.
And where would you rank Europe when you look at the major sort of political climate jurisdictions? You've got China, India, Europe, and the US. Would you put Europe at the top in terms of the action?
Well, in terms of commitment, I'm sure Europe it is, yes.
Yeah.
But I think when we said about countries, so you mentioned about United States, I think we are in United States. We have already, we are supplying to Amazon United States energy. We are in 23 states United States. We are the second or the third largest producer of renewable United States. And I think that the energy policy is depending on the state. It's not dependent on the federal authorities. So I think no new coal power plant has been opened in the last 5 years. And we knew that there are very many, we have been already closed. And each state, they have their own targets. There are very many cities are already subscribing contracts with companies like ours. Most of the largest and more technological important industry, they're already doing the same thing and committed. So, which I think is, one is what is the official speech, another one is the reality. I saw there, United States 41% is free of emissions. So which I think that is a reality. So toward another European countries where this is far from that. They are already working on that one, but I think in the case of China, China is doing a lot, but I think at the same time is making another thing. At the same time, they are already generating with coal, they are already generating renewable, but they're investing. That is, I think, the first or the second country investing more renewable. So I think we have to push in this direction more.
Kara, I'd like to turn back to you now and talk a little bit about the greening of transport networks. When I was doing research for this panel, I couldn't help but notice your boss, Jeff Bezos, riding on an electric rickshaw around India. So clearly he's interested in the subject. But what are you doing? Obviously, Amazon relies a lot on logistics for deliveries. What are you doing to green your own transport networks? And what pressure are you putting on governments in terms of rolling out charging infrastructure?
Yeah, no, we're really excited about sort of the possibilities of greening transportation for us, for all of the cities, locations where we operate around the world. And we've done a couple of things. One is to, again, try to use our scale to think about how do we send market signals in our supply chain that we want these products and these services. So when we've looked at electric vehicles, we already have hundreds of electric vehicles operating in the United States and Europe and places where we operate around the world. But we didn't, for example, have a solution for a fully electric vehicle that worked for us. So we partnered with a company called Rivian, and we made the largest ever order of electric vehicles. We ordered 100,000 vehicles. Electric vehicles that we will implement by 2030. They'll be on the road starting in 2021 with 10,000 by 2025. So we're trying to rapidly accelerate that. And with the rickshaws, again, we're looking again at everywhere where we operate and thinking about what's the right solution. So we have 10,000 of those rickshaws coming, and they'll be starting in 20 different cities throughout India in 2020. And then we'll look at where we can test and model, collect, the telematics data, and think about where we can share that information. We're looking at building some coalitions around this, so more to come on that shortly. But we think, again, the more we share these solutions, the more we try to drive at scale and partner, particularly in the cities where we're operating, and think about how can we extend our need to build that kind of electrification infrastructure for our needs to our customers, and how can we think about partnering for better urban policy and transportation alternatives and things like walking and biking and public transportation, as well as the electrification and the sort of transformation that we're pushing.
And can you give us a sense, if we take a sort of a global perspective, which companies and countries and cities are perhaps more receptive to pressure on improving and expanding charging networks, and where do you maybe see more pushback?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, actually we're seeing this in most of the places where we operate as a need. I think people understand this is where the world is headed. So again, in the United States, to your point, I think it's been a state by state, if not city by city effort. Obviously, California has an incredible kind of investment in electrification already. So we've done a lot of our piloting there. But we're really seeing this happen all over in cities in Europe. We look at the urban vehicle access restrictions that are happening, the policymakers are doing, and what that's actually driving in terms of where, constraint can drive innovation. So where that's, where we're thinking about how that changes our ability to get product to customer. The other thing I will say is that we've taken a look not only just at the transport, being a retailer and a logistics company, but we look at that all the way through how we operate. So we look at inventory placement, and one of the best things we can do is actually move inventory closer to customers. So that's been an interesting insight in some of our carbon work as well, where our best carbon option is our same day and same day delivery. So speed is actually our lowest carbon option in that way, because the inventory is already closer to customers and we can get it there. So when we think about those kinds of things and think about where we're building, what kinds of partnerships we can have with those cities and communities, not only just on the transportation piece, but on the overall fulfillment network.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about carbon offsetting now. Perhaps, Christoph, you could talk a little bit about that. There's some skepticism and in some sectors, a lot of skepticism about how effective they can really be. Some people sort of compare them to indulgences in the Middle Ages, where you just pay this money and it somehow offsets your guilt. But when you sort of do your business, like how can you and how can we be so sure that these offset projects are as effective as they claim to be? You know, one of the criticisms is, okay, you sort of offload your guilt. This company goes and builds some forests, and no one ever looks at it again. What are these right questions to be asking? Is that a valid concern for people to have?
Look, I think carbon offsets are they're an interesting option in what we're discussing. To HP, it is not something that really drives our behavior. For us, it's about business imperatives. It's across everything that we do. I think there's really, on the one hand side, sustainability, on the other one, diversity. In the entire ecosystem that we influence, that is what drives us. When we speak to our employees, the self-motivation, it cannot come from carbon credits. I think it needs to be instilled in the culture of a company. And so, again, I think they're nice to have, but they're business imperatives for us. You know, we are tracking how many customers, how many opportunities we are winning versus competition because of the actions that we take around sustainability and diversity. And on sustainability, I can tell you that my team closed north of $900 million worth of business last year because we had a story to tell on our sustainability efforts that differentiated us from our competitors. And I think that's the type of messaging that we want to lead with. I also want to comment on the role of government. I look at this in a similar way. Yes, the government has a role to play, but I don't think that any company should excuse to wait for government to drive legislation or to drive any targets. I think we are responsible and we can lead governments at times. And so that's how I think about government, the role of government, and that's how I think about carbon credits.
Christian, do you want to get in on that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, everybody has a role to play, and you should focus on those areas where you have the biggest influence. We as an organization, we manage close to 5 billion square feet of space for our clients. With that space, we are responsible for purchasing all the goods which they need to run their space. And so what we are currently doing is we have about 30,000 providers who are delivering those goods to our clients. And so we are trying now to assess, can we identify products which are better from a sustainability point of view than others, and then we can propose to our clients, instead of buying this type of product, rather buy this type of product because that has a better carbon footprint, for example. I mean, these are the things where we have really influence, and I think that's what corporates have to do. They have to look at their area of expertise and see what they can deliver.
Ignacio, I'd like to get back to the question of the outlook for renewables investment. The latest Bloomberg NEF data showed, and we saw that in one of the slides that Aaron showed us something of a stagnation in renewables investment in 2018, when we saw investment stalling at $282 billion. I believe that's about a half of the investment that we will need, or we need at this period, if we're going to see an under 2 degrees Celsius outcome. How concerned should we be about that? Is that a blip? Do you expect renewables investment to take off again over the next 10 years, or is it a...
No, I'm convinced in that. I think they're when we started investing 20 years ago, I think renewable technologies were not already competitive. They need some kind of subsidy. So, and that makes it, I think the growth got quite slow because not every country was ready to put the subsidies for making that happen. So now the situation is also absolutely different. Today, the generation with sun or generation with wind in most areas of the globe are more competitive to generate on other sources. The CapEx required for making a wind plant, a power plant, or to make a solar power plant is lower than to make a power plant with coal, or make a power plant with of gas or with oil. So I think CapEx is lower, has not really variable cost, and the final cost is already cheaper. So that's why I think companies like yours and other companies, I think they are already making right decision. The right decision in the sense of signing long-term contracts of energy at very competitive price, which is cheaper than what you can already expect in the medium term coming from fossil fuels. And I think today is not a question only to make the things already better for defending the planet. It's because it's better today because it's more competitive. And that is something which I'm everywhere insisting. I think if you compare with old obsolete power plant, which is fully paid, and you have to make a new one, probably the thing is not already fitting, but that is not the case. So my feeling is that the economy is going to be more and more electrified. Because of many reasons, among others, because climatic change, but because there's a certain number of services that only electricity can already provide. And I think that's what that makes is going to require more and more investment. Areas you mentioned before, transport. Transport, I'm sure, is going to be a boom of electric vehicles. It's going to be a boom, not only because of the restriction in towns, et cetera, what is happening, but as well because it's more convenient. So it's cheaper to use and more convenient in many fields. So the cooling and heating, I was saying yesterday in a panel. So London, 40 years ago, was already just a disaster of air contamination. And they decide to change that one, put in the necessary rules for moving from the coal boilers and heaters to gas or other devices. Can be made exactly the same thing now. Cooling and heating represent 40% of the emissions. And today they are already, the pan heating is cheaper. In many cases, they're using another system for heating or for cooling. For heating or for cooling. So that is already just a decision, political decision saying, if you do so, you can be already diminish your taxes. Automatically that is going to boom. And that is going to happen. So that's why I'm sure renewables is going to continue growing. Solar, I think, I said the example of Spain, I think it's a plan for 60,000 megawatts, it's a demand for 200,000. So now the limitation is permit, it's not limitation of investment.
Well, that's an optimistic way to end this panel. I have about 20 more questions here I could ask you, but we're on a very tight deadline, and our special guest, Mark Carney, is just ready to come to the stage. So thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.